So today we have verses 14, 15, 16, and 17 lined up. I'll start with verse number 14. I will chant. Aham Veshvanaro Bhutva Praninam Dehamashrita Pranapanasamayukta Pachamyannam Chaturvidham. So this verse translates to having become Vaishvanar or fire, abiding in the body of living beings, united with prana or inhalation and apana exhalation, I digest the fourfold food. So let's take this up word by word. Aham is I. Vaishvanara is fire. And just give me a moment. Bhutva is having become. Praninam. So prani is beings. So praninam becomes of beings of all living beings. Deham. Dehe is body. Deham is body. Ashrita, finding refuge or abiding. Pran, apan, samayukta. So pran is what we inhale. Apan is what we exhale. Sam is balance. And yukt is united. So the word prana, apan, samayukta becomes united with prana, inhalation, and apana, exhalation. Pachami is digest, I is implied. Annam, an is grain. So annam is grains or food. Chaturvidham, of four kinds or fourfold. So the verse translates to having become Vaishvanara, fire, abiding in the body of living beings, united with pran and apan, I digest the fourfold food. So let's chant it together. Aham Vaishvanaro Bhutva प्राणिनाम देहमाश्रितः प्राणपानसमायुक्तः पचाम्यन्नं chaturvidham. So as we just recapped, that the last two verses of this chapter that we did last time covered how God energizes the macrocosm. From this verse onwards, we start understanding how the microcosm is energized. So, Vaishvanar, as we did the translation, means fire. And here we are actually talking about the fire of digestion. So, what the verse is saying is that God is the fire within the body which enables us to digest the food that we partake. So, now that logic is given. So, God permeates the earth and energizes or enables food to be grown, which is what we partake. Okay. So, now the interesting part is that whatever we consume by our mouth, it is digested, assimilated, circulated, and absorbed by our digestive, absorptive, and circulatory systems. And this is what we all did in our elementary biology, class 8 in school. So we know that all the organs of our digestive system, starting from our mouth and then the trachea, and so, stomach, liver, pancreas, gallbladder, so on and so forth, they at the right time secrete digestive juices that enable us to digest food. So that is the physiology of the body. But how are they enabled? How do they function? All these organs, how do they function? It is God's energy that fires up this complete digestive system and digestive process. So it is a manifestation of the life enabling principle. And just as an aside, I would like to share with you that the scientists tried to just manually create, or scientifically, what science we know, create the digestive system, just that part of the human body. And it was enough to fill up one whole room with the entire processes to take care of that. So imagine our body, which is so compact, all the organs do their necessary function. It's actually non trivial. It's something that we miss, but we should not be missing. So that is one. This is God's manifestation as a life enabling principle. Also, heat is essential for digestion. And now that the winters are setting in, we all experience this digestive issues. So it brings us to the fact that heat is, or warmth is essential for digestion. Now, the verse says that God, as the fire of digestion, remains the digestive force in all the beings, plants, animals, and humans. And once we digest the food and it is sent to the recipient organs of our body, we are energized, we are able to function, do whatever we want to do. The next word that we need to look at is the pran, apana, samayukt. So here we are really not talking about breath intake. Okay, balance in breath is important, but what prana means is any intake, and apan means any output or excretion. So pran and apan should be interpreted to include other intakes and outputs besides breath. So when we consume food, we digest, absorb, circulate it, and whatever is not required is ejected as waste, right? Our excretory system. So the balance between the intake and the exit or the output needs to be maintained so that we remain healthy. Proper intake, absorption, circulation, and ejection will generate inner strength, and balance of this, all these ensures that we remain healthy, we are healthy. And apart from food, this balance actually applies to all aspects of our life. So, when we get emotional, we just want to talk about sorrow. So, that is what we are taking in continuously. So, we have to stop that. We have to maintain a balance in all aspects of our life, whether it is material, physical, emotional, thoughts. We need to regulate these. And if you look around us, you will find that we normally function in the accumulation mode. So we keep acquiring things. We want to have it with us, we want to possess them. So that is what we have to try to remove. We should also let them go, let things go. Then the other word that the verse is using is chaturvidham, or the fourfold, four kinds of food. Now, in our traditional knowledge system, food was divided or classified into four categories, and not as carbohydrates, proteins, etc., but on the basis of food that is chewed. So, where our molars are used, so such as bread or chapatis, etc. Then, food that is swallowed or drunk. So, that is mostly liquid and semi liquid food. Then, food that is sucked. So, when you are actually eating a sugar cane, you suck the juice from the sugar cane. And food that is licked, like honey. So, these are the fourfold kind of foods that we are talking about here. And if you think of it, all food, whether it is vegetarian or non vegetarian, prepared or unprepared, raw or ripe, falls in one of these categories. So, this is what this verse number 14 was talking about. Let's move on to verse number 15. I will chant. सर्वस्य चाहं हृदि सन्निविष्टो मता स्मृतिर्ज्ञानं पोहनं च वेदैश्च सर्वैरहमेव वेद्यो वेदान्तकृद्वेद्वेदेव चाहम्. So the Lord goes on to say, and I am seated in the hearts of all. From me are memory, knowledge, as well as their absence. I am verily that which is to be known in all the Vedas. I am indeed the author of Vedanta and the knower of Vedas. So let's take this up word by word. Sarvasya is of all, cha and aham I, hridi is in the hearts, sanvishtaha is established or seated, mataha from me, smriti is memory, jnanam is knowledge, apohanam is their absence, or the loss of these. Cha and Vedeh by Vedas, Cha again and Sarve all, Aham I, A verily, Vedyah to be known, Vedant Krit. So Vedant is where the Vedas end, or Vedant. Krit is one who writes. So Vedant Krit becomes author of Vedanta, Vedavit, the knower of Vedas. Ave indeed, cha and aham I. So the verse translates to, and I am seated in the hearts of all. From me are memory, knowledge, as well as their absence. I am verily that which is to be known in all the Vedas. I am indeed the author of Vedant and the knower of Vedas. So let's chant it together. सर्वस्य चाहं हृदि सन्निविष्टो मता स्मृतिर्ज्ञानं पोहनं च वेदैश्च सर्वैरहमेव वेद्यो वेदान्तकृद्वेद विदेव चाहम्. So now, like, let us look at the sequence again. See, one is revising it again and again so that the points settle, and not only during the session while we are discussing during our satsang, but throughout the day. I mean, 24 by 7, we remember this. So let's look at the chronology. Verse 13 said how God descends the earth and permeates the earth and enters the beings through the food that the beings consume. Then the last verse told us how God becomes the energy that we derive the food from the food. In this verse now, again continuing with the microcosmic aspect, Krishna describes himself when he's identifying with the pure consciousness as God, being seated in the hearts of all beings. And heart here does not refer to the organ heart, but refers to that which is our core. So heart here means our core, and that core has the capacity for all positive qualities of love, compassion, tolerance, mercy, etc. So here, when we talk of heart in this verse, the usage in the English language would be the heart of a problem, or my heart isn't in it, or don't lose heart. That is the context in which we are talking, not that my heart beats at this rate and it pumps so much of blood. We are not talking from that point of view. So what the verse is saying, that Paramatman is the core, the essence of us all. Now, this verse is very similar to verse number 18 of chapter 13. Chapter 13 was our Kshetragya Vibhag Yog. So that verse read, verse number 18 of chapter 13 read that Brahman, the light of all lights, is said to be beyond darkness, knowledge, that which is to be known, the goal of knowledge seated in the hearts of all. So we are almost repeating what we have already read 2 chapters back. So now let's look at our composition. So one breakup is that we consist of the gross body, which is the physical body, the subtle body, emotion and thoughts, the causal body, which is our seed personality, our vasanas, and as we go inwards, we reach that substratum, which is Om, the pure consciousness. So, Om is our core, around which the rest of the body and the personality takes shape, which is born actually out of our seed personality. So, God, apart from enlivening the gross body, also enlivens the rest of it. So, if you have Om, then you have the vasanas, the seed personality, and emotions and thoughts, and then the physical body. So, God, that Om is the core and is the enlivening force for the entire personality. Just as the ocean is the core for all waves, clay is the core for all clay pots, and so on and so forth. Gold for gold ornaments, etc. Now, this verse is talking about Smriti Gyan. Okay. And you may recollect that in chapter 7, which was the Jnana Vigyan Yoga, we had discussed the four components of our subtle body. So they were Man, Buddhi, Ahankar, and Chit. Now, Man was the focusing part, Buddhi was what thinks and analyzes. Ahankar was the I-ness, that I thought of this and so I focused on this. Chit is the memory part. So that is the place where we store our experiences and we pull out what we need at a particular time. So Chit is that memory part. So of these four components, Manha, Buddhi, Ahankar, and Chit, Buddhi and Chit directly relate to knowledge. And what the verse is saying is that these also emanate from God. Now, let's just go into detail on these two. Now, memory, when we are talking about, is the sum total of all our wisdom. So, when you talk about, when you say that a person is competent, let's say as a gardener or as a driver or as a doctor, what we are saying is that that person has the capacity to recollect what they have read or learned or experienced or studied, and they are able to recollect the right memory at the right time. This is what we mean by our wisdom. So, the sum total of a person's memories is a person's wisdom and the ability to pull it out when required. So, that is our wisdom. Anyone's wisdom, all of us have wisdom in some field or another. And with this wisdom, with this memory, with this smriti, we go through the various experiences in the world and gather new experiences which are nothing but new inputs. This is again processed or filtered by our intellect, by the buddhi and discrimination, and converted to knowledge. So, this is how we build on our knowledge. Now, the filtration or the processing of the input varies from person to person depending upon the capability of the equipment or capability of the intellect or capability of the buddhi. If the intellect is flawed, it's negative, it will understand the same experience incorrectly. So, what the verse is saying that not only the correct experiences, but ignorance and forgetfulness also arise from God. So, our entire personality actually arises from Brahman, and all this is nothing but our core, that supreme reality. And this is what we need to know. This is what is ought to be known. And this is also the culmination of all knowledge. That means after knowing that core, there is nothing more that we need to know. And all our knowledges, whatever worldly knowledge that we have, will actually end up, they will always culminate in this knowledge. So when we move to inward towards our essence, we reach Vedant, which is nothing but as I said in the translation, conclusion of Vedas, Vedas is what needs to be known. So, conclusion of knowledge or end of knowledge. Or the goal of knowledge is the self, that God, that Brahman, that Paramatman, which is the core of us all. And this was also covered in detail in chapter 13. See, when we were doing chapter 13, I said that this is one of the critical chapters, difficult to understand, but we will keep coming back to it again and again to understand us and how we relate to Brahman, how we are Brahman. So in chapter 13, Lord Krishna had revealed Gyan, which is knowledge, which is nothing but the pure knowledge, awareness, consciousness. We had also talked about Gayam, that which ought to be known, again, that absolute knowledge from which all knowledges emerge. Gyan Gamyam is the goal of knowledge, the culmination of all our knowledge. And also in that chapter, we had discussed in detail that there is only one knower of the field, which is that Paramatman. Now, in this chapter, again, we are referring to Vedas, which are considered apaurusha, which means that they were actually not written by man per se. They were compiled by sages who had experienced, who were self realized. So, Vedas contain pointers to that truth, which the self realized have experienced and compiled. So the verse is saying that God is the author of the Vedas or that truth, and God is the knower of Vedas because he is the author. I mean, so it's like saying that only Milton can actually understand Milton. We can attempt to read Milton and try to understand what he wants to say, but only he knows what he wants to say. So God is beyond our body, mind, and intellect, and it is when we realize God or we experience Paramatma, we understand the contents of the Vedas. With that, let's move on to verse number 16. I will chant. Dvamevo purusho loke क्षर एव च क्षर सर्वाणि भूतानि कूटस्थोऽक्षर उच्यते. So the verse translates to, there are two Purushas in the world, the perishable and the imperishable. The perishable are all the beings, and the imperishable is Kuthastha. That's the word which is used and which translates to immutable. So let's do the translation. Dwa is two, imo in these, Purushaha beings, Lok is worlds, Kshar which is perishable, Cha and Akshar is imperishable, Ev even, Cha and Kshar perishable, Sarvani all beings, all, actually Sarvani is all, Bhutani is beings, so Sarvani Bhutani becomes all beings. Kutastha is immutable, Akshar is imperishable, Uchyate is called. So the verse translates to, there are two Purushas in the world, the perishable and the imperishable. All beings are perishable and the imperishable is immutable or Kutastha. So let's chant it together. द्वामेवो पुरुषः लोके क्षर एव च क्षर सर्वाणि भूतानि कूटस्थो अक्षर उच्यते. So, after covering how God supports both the macrocosm and the microcosm, so we discussed the sun, its warmth, the earth, its potentialities, the human, its capabilities. All this is actually in the realm of matter. Now, all these fields, all of them, the sun, the earth, humans, etc., they form the macrocosm, and the microcosm are nothing but God Himself. Now we move on to the last portion of this chapter, where we move towards that Brahman, that root of the Ashwatha tree, that transcends both the macrocosm and the microcosm. And again, referring to chapter 13, see, we covered exhaustively in that chapter Kshetra, matter, Kshetragya, knower of the field. And we also discussed in detail that Kshetragya is nothing but the pure consciousness, which is God, which is layered or it is conditioned by desires and vasanas, our seed personality, that composition that we discussed in one of the previous verses today. And in chapter 14, which was the last chapter that we covered, which was the Gun Triya Vibhaga Yoga, we learned of the qualities of the nature of the three gunas and how they bind us to the world. So, Sattva is luminous, binds us to knowledge and happiness. Rajas is, passionate, binds us to action. Tamas is delusional and binds us to heedlessness. The point is that all the three gunas are actually binds. And in that chapter, in chapter 14, we also read about how the gunas influence our future births because they influence the kind of vasanas that we uh, uh, promote within ourselves. And also, how when we transcend the three gunas, we head towards liberation, which is our eternal self. That is, see, factually, we are all immortal. Our soul is immortal. So, and that is what we read in chapter 2, that the soul never dies. It's the body that you shed. It is, therefore, the identification with the material body that makes the soul suffer birth and death. These experiences birth and death are actually against or opposite or oppose the eternal nature of the soul. And that is why we feel incomplete, we are agitated, because we are identifying with the wrong thing. So the soul is continuously seeking release from these experiences, the experiences of the world, which are at the level of the body. So when we go beyond the gunas, we escape the cycle of birth and death, or we are liberated, or we taste Amrit, or we attain moksha. These are the different expressions that we have been reading in Bhagwad Gita itself. So the living entities who are struggling in the world with mind and the five senses, completely identifying with the material bodies, are always agitated because the material body is changing, the environment is changing. So, as long as we are identifying with the world, we are conditioned, that is one. Our body is changing with the matter. Now, the matter is changing, so we appear to be changing. And this is that perishable realm, which is called as Kshar. So, one of the Purushas that is described is Kshar. All living beings are Kshar because to that extent, all of us are changing and are perishable. Now, when we transcend this identification with matter and start identifying or moving towards Brahman, then the change does not affect us. So, the external changes that we undergo, all of us will undergo birth, growth, aging, decay, and finally dying. Now, we understand that these are in the realm of kshetra or the material body. But as the kshetragya or in the spiritual world, the identification is not with the body, it is with Brahman. We take the support of Brahman, of God. So then there is no old age, there is no birth, there is no death. What we have been discussing in chapters 13 and 14 is that this does not mean that we will not die or we will not grow old or we will not suffer pain. But our identification is not with that. So it doesn't matter. It's like, a toddler holding on to a toy and not letting it go. The older person knows that, okay, at some point of time, the toy will be released. So it's the same detachment that we function with. So this is the akshar or the imperishable aspect. So we read in chapter 14 that having crossed over the gunas, once we remove our attachment or we transcend the gunas, the seeker is fit for reaching or becoming Brahman. And specifically, I'll quote verse number 20 of chapter 14, the embodied one, having crossed over these three gunas, is completely freed from birth, death, old age, and pain arising from the body, attains immortality. And one can go through the recording of that session to understand what it means, completely freed from birth, death, old age, and pain. Now, lack of knowledge or avidya or ignorance leads to existence of vasanas, and that is the result. The consequence of that is the cycle of birth and death. Now, the wise one, having conquered the vasanas or conquered the gunas, escapes the cycle of birth and death. And you may also recollect the path of return and no return that we covered in chapter 8, verses 24 and 25. So, knowledge of the self or knowledge of Brahman, knowledge of God leads to the sublimation of asanas, because we move from our material goals, worldly goals, and continue to pitch higher and higher goals, and finally rest with God as our ultimate goal. And once that is set as the goal, so that is the only vasana remaining. And our birth is a result of the vasanas. So once we have pitched the goal as God, actually effectively there is no other vasanas remaining. We just want God. So ultimately we will reach there and we become akshar or imperishable. So that is what the verse meant. Let's move on to verse number 17, last verse for the day. उत्तमः पुरुषः सत्त्वयनः परमात्मेतयुदाहृतः यो लोकत्रयमवेश्य बिभर्तय व्ययः ईश्वरः. So the verse translates to, but the highest Purusha, being, is another, called the Supreme Self, the indestructible Lord who pervades and sustains the three worlds. So let's take this up word by word. Uttamaha is the highest, the best, the supreme. Purusha is being, tu but, anye another, Paramatma, that is the supreme self. Iti thus, Udaharit is called, Yah who, Lok Trayam, so Lok is worlds, three is three, Lok Trayam becomes three worlds. Avishya, what pervades, Bhibharti, sustains, Avyaya, indestructible, Ishwar is Lord. So, but the highest Purusha being is another, called the Supreme Self, the indestructible Lord who pervades and sustains the three worlds. So let's chant it together. Uttam Purushastvanyah Parmatme tu Dharitaha Yo Lokatrayama Vishaya Bibhartaya Vyaya Ishvaraha. So, what the verse is saying is that beyond Akshar, perishable, Akshar, imperishable, exists the third Purush, which is the Supreme Purush, the Supreme Reality, that God, Paramatman. So, and that God, that Supreme Reality is the indestructible Lord, sustaining the three worlds. Now, three worlds, when we are talking about Triyalok, uh, you can interpret it as the three powers that sustain in the universe. So that is at the macrocosmic level: creation, maintenance, and destruction, which are represented in our tradition by the Trinity: Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. Brahma the creator, Vishnu the maintainer, and Mahesh or Shiva the destructor. So though so that is one interpretation at the macrocosmic level. The other interpretation at the microcosmic level is the three worlds or the three states that we individuals exist in. So the waker, dreamer, and the deep sleeper. So that is another way of looking at the term three worlds. Now, though they are represented separately, so the powers are represented separately as, the creator, maintainer, and Mahesh. The point is that they are actually totally integrated. And similarly for our states, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. So though they are three different states, but actually one flows from the other. They are totally integrated. Each one can have no separate existence. So if you don't wake up, you know, you are actually not sleeping. So each state or each power flows from one into the next, and this forms a cycle. So all the worlds and all the states actually exist in Brahman. Or, in other words, the self controls and commands the macrocosmic cycles of creation and dissolution and the microcosmic cycle of the beings. So it is that substratum in which all these experiences and all the cycles are taking place. So the creation, maintenance, and destruction is also taking place in that substratum, and all our experiences are taking place in that substratum. So that self controls and commands all states of consciousness. That is the supreme Purusha. The two Purushas that we covered in the previous verse talked about the beings, and those humans actually, who are the gyanis, who are on the path of, who are there at the threshold of God. They're just waiting there to just cross over. And where will they go? Where will they reach? That Supreme Purush which we are talking about in this verse. So Brahman is that imperishable and changeless substratum. So with that, we conclude our today's session.